Okay, in this video, I just want to show you how to sketch quickly. So, first example, r equals 1 minus 2 cosine of theta. Please look at that chart that I posted on Haiku, or go back and watch my video, the first video again. The rules are very important. Now, you are going to focus on these guys. So, you're going to consider the ratio of A over B. So, 1 over 2. Now, since your ratio, 1 over 2, is less than 1, and if you remember, I hope you do, then you get a heart-shaped graph, but with the inner loop inside. So it's going to look like this. Or like that. Okay? Now, excuse me. Now I know what I'm expecting to get. So now I just need to sketch. So this is what I'm going to do, and I always do that. I make a table. You can do it in your head. Pretty soon you'll be able to do it in your head. But right now I'm explaining, so let's make a table. We don't want to make any silly mistakes. So let's pick some easy values of theta so that we can evaluate. So I always start with 0 degrees. So I'm going to erase after I do my calculations here. 1 minus 2 cosine of 0. Cosine of 0 is 1. So you get 1 minus 2, which is negative 1. So the first point, 0 comma negative 1. So 0 degrees, here you are. That's your initial position. But radius is negative 1. So you're not going to be here with the radius equals to 1. But you're going to, we talked about it before your winter break. So you're going to be on the opposite side. So that's where your point is. Okay, so let's erase that. So 0 degrees, but you're moving to the other direction, and this distance is 1. Okay, our first point. Next, let's try cosine of, I don't know, I want to consider first quadrant again. So pi over, how about pi over, I don't know, the 6. Okay, 1 minus 2 cosine pi over 6. And you get 1 minus 2, square root of 3 over 2. And 1 minus square root of 3 is 1.7. So you get the negative number, negative 0.3, I believe. Now, or wait a second, 0.7, I think. Since it's the negative number, then, by the way, pi over 6 is right here. So you have to be on the opposite side. And the negative number, very close to the origin. So it's going to be, we're going to be somewhere here. Now we can try pi over 3. Pi over 3 is 60 degrees, so 1 minus 2 cosine of pi over 3. 1 minus 2 cosine of 60 is 1/2. And we get, do we get 0? Yeah. One more time. Cosine of pi over 3 is 1/2. 1/2 times 2 is 1. So yes, we do get 0. So pi over 3 is somewhere here, 60 degrees, and you get 0. So you're at the origin. So that's where your loop, that inner loop is. So you can tell. Or maybe not. So let's do more. How about pi over 2? So 1 minus 2 cosine of pi over 2. Cosine of pi over 2 is 0. So you just get 1. So let's plot this point. Pi over 2, that's where you are. And 0, oh, 1. So 1 is right here. Okay, that's where we are. Now let's do more. How about pi? 1 minus 2 cosine of pi. Cosine of pi is negative 1, so you get 1 plus 2, which is 3. So pi, 180 degrees, here you are on the left side, but the radius equals to 3. So that was 1. So it's 1, 2, 3. And that's where you are. So you can tell that that loop, the inner loop, is going to be somewhere here. Okay. Now let's do 3 pi over 2. And that would be our final. 3 pi over 2. So we do 1 minus 2 cosine 3 pi over 2. Cosine 3 pi over 2 is 0, so you just get 1. So 3 pi over 2, that's where you are, and it's 1. Okay, so it's gonna look like this. So the inner loop, you're inside, so that's your little inner loop, and then the big one, and we meet at the origin. So that's what you're expecting to get. Let me do another example. You will get used to it. You will eventually you'll be able to just glance, look at the equation, and you'll be able to tell what the graph is going to look like. So, second example. Let's say about this one. Graph R equals R cosine of 2 theta. Okay, so remember that chart, remember those rules. It doesn't say a plus or minus 3 cosine of 2 theta. It just says 3 cosine of 2 theta. So in that case, you focus on this coefficient. If we didn't have the 2 and it was just an invisible 1, 3 cosine of theta, then that would be a circle. But in our case, it's not a circle. We're going to have that rose with a certain number of petals. How do we know how many petals there are? Oh, we'll look at this coefficient, and you say when n is even, in our case it is even, then the rose will have 2 times n petals. That happens when your n is even. When it's odd, you just get that the certain number of petals, whatever that coefficient is. So in our case, it's 2 times 2, and we get 4 petals. Now look, it's cosine, it's not sine. So that means something. If you watched my first video very carefully, I hope you remember that your petals, at least one of them, has to be on the horizontal line axis. Okay, so we're expecting to get the 4 petals. I'm going to make a little chart for myself, just the same way I did it previously. And then again, I'm going to start with 0. 3 cosine of 2 times 0. Cosine of 0 is 1, so you just get 3 times 1 is 3. So let's plot that point. 0 degrees, initial position, and the radius is 3. So that's where you are. Next, I don't want to put any numbers. So 3. Next, let's try, how about we're dealing with cosine and it's 2 times theta. So why don't we do pi over 6? So it's 3 cosine 2 times pi over 6, and that becomes 3 cosine pi over 3. Cosine of pi over 3 is 1/2, so you get 3 over 2. 3 over 2. So pi over 6 is approximately this angle. 3 over 2. So this is 3. So 3 over 2 is 1.5. Let's say somewhere here. Well, yeah, it's the first petal. You can tell that it's going to go this way. So let's try pi over 2. Let's see what happens when it's 90 degrees angle. So 3 cosine 2 times pi over 2. We get 3 times cosine of pi. What's cosine of pi? Cosine of pi is -1. But -1 times 3 is -3. When your angle is pi over 2, then The radius is not 3, it's -3, so opposite direction, so we're going to be right here. So that's where your next other petal is. Okay, let's continue. Let's try pi. 3 times cosine 2 times pi. Cosine of 2 pi is 1. And 3 times 1 is 3. So when it's pi, your angle is pi, then the radius is 3. So we are here. So that's where your next petal is. Okay. Now, how about, let's try 3 pi over 2. So 3 times cosine 2 times 3 pi over 2. So cosine of 3 pi. Cosine of 3 pi, 1, 2, 3, -1. So you get -3. I hope my calculations are right. So 3 pi over 2, 270 degrees, and it's -3, so you're going the opposite direction, and that's where you are. Okay, so I can tell what my, and all the petals meet at the origin. So we're going to get something like this, and we were expecting to get 4 petals, so that's what we have now. Okay, example number 3. R equals 2 plus 2 cosine. So when your ratio equals to 1, then you don't get any inner loops, but you just get a heart-shaped graph. Sometimes it looks like this, or like that. Okay, so, and one more thing, and see this point right here. It has to be at the origin. So this graph contains the origin as one of the points, and this particular point. Okay, so that's what we're expecting to get, and that happens when your ratio equals to 1. Now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to make a little chart. 0 degrees. 2 plus 2 cosine of 0. Cosine of 0 is 1. 2 plus 2 is 4. So 0, comma 4. Here we are. Next, let's try pi over, which one is easy? Pi over 3. 2 plus 2 cosine pi over 3. Pi over 3. Cosine of pi over 3 is 1/2. This becomes 1, so the result is 3. 60 degrees here, and 3, and that will be 1, 2, 3. So we're here. So you can tell you're going this way. Let's try pi over 2. 2 plus 2 cosine pi over 2. Cosine of pi over 2 is 0, so that's just 2. So 1, 2. So you're going to curve, go down, and I'm sure you can tell what it's going to look like because you're supposed to be somewhere at the origin, so you have to curve here down like this. And it's symmetric, so it's supposed to look like that. If you want, you can add more points. So for example, pi, see what happens. 2 plus 2 cosine of pi. Cosine of pi is -1, so then that means you get just 0. So when it's pi, 180 degrees, your radius is 0. You're at the origin. So that's why we don't have any points on the left side. And then you can try if you want. You can do even more, but I hope you get the idea. But you can try 3 pi over 2, see what happens. 2 plus 2 cosine 3 pi over 2. Cosine of 3 pi over 2 is 0, so you just get 2. So, and that's the point right here. So this is it. That's how you sketch. And, you know, they're pretty much the same. All the rules, you just have to memorize the rules, the shapes, and you know how your graph looks based on the ratio A over B, because that makes a big difference. And if you remember those rules, those steps, then you can, you know, make a chart, easy chart, and sketch your graph within a few minutes. I hope that makes sense.